Welcome to Sally Speaks Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Sally Arkell-Boles, your high performance success and mindset mentor. I firmly believe that you deserve to create the wealth, wellness, and wisdom you've always desired. This podcast is your go-to source for inspiration, education, and motivation to guide you on your path to success. Each episode features exceptional guests who are leaders in their respective fields, sharing their incredible stories and journeys to empower and uplift you. This week on Sally Speaks podcast, I am so excited to have Anke Herrmann, the entrepreneurial experiment expert. Now, Anke and I met a number of months ago, I guess almost a year probably, through a mutual connection in New Zealand. And Anke lives in Spain. I'm in Canada. We have friends in New Zealand. I love how this marketplace works today, that we can be connected globally. And as a multi-passionate coach, an online text expert, teacher, software developer, linguist, dressmaker, with the heart of a creator and the mind of an engineer, Anke is just the most incredible woman you'll ever meet. She's so down to earth. She's full of laughter. But I tell you, the ideas that she comes up with when you start brainstorming with her are just incredible. She's the author of Taming the Tech Monster and hosts the Soul Touched by Dogs podcast. She helps mission-driven coaches and educators create and fill strategic virtual events to boost their reach, authority, and revenue. Who wants more revenue? Me, everybody. Without the tech headaches, me. I think that's one of the keys that I noticed recently when I was looking into your whole opportunity for the strategic virtual events, is that most of us as entrepreneurs don't want to deal with all the background, right? And so even though we might be introverts and we want to be on stage and have the opportunity to showcase ourselves, it's difficult sometimes for us to do that. Anke also loves heading out with her dogs and enjoying the Spanish sun, of which I'm really jealous right now because I'm in Canada. We have a lot of sun today. I'm not in the snowy part like my sisters, but it definitely, you can definitely feel the winter coming on here. So I wanted to really dig into a whole bunch of different things today. The first thing is, tell me about your entrepreneurial journey, because there's a lot of new entrepreneurs out there and they're looking for that overnight success. And tell us a little bit, I can see you giggling already. Tell us a little bit about what your journey was like when you first became an entrepreneur, but over 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me in that wonderful introduction. It's awesome that we have this global connection, and I'm like really happy to be here. So my entrance into the entrepreneurial space literally happened. It's going to be 20 years in like 2 months from now, so like really close. And it was one of those moves that everybody else thought was crazy, and it was totally logical for me. Well, I had started, well, it all kind of started because I'd taken some Spanish classes, and I'd learned some Spanish, and then I thought, well, what am I going to do with my newly found Spanish? And I lived in London in the UK at the time, so I'd started to do all these, like, take little trips to Spain. And every time I had to go back to London, I was like, I don't like, every time it was a little harder to go back, right? And I remember there was one moment where I was like, so what would happen if I didn't go back? Right? What would happen? I don't know. It's just like it felt like this calling of the soul to sort of say, oh, I would love to live in one of those little whitewashed houses, And then the next thought was like, well, let's just go there. Like, let's just, and I was literally back in London, and I was like, so let me just allow my thoughts to go there. Let me just play that through. What would happen? Like, if I was really moving to Spain, like, what would that look like? And what would I do for a living? Because I'm thinking, oh, well, I was working in the software industry, so I was a software developer, like a proper programmer, and didn't quite like where that industry was headed, because it was like, all was like outsourcing to Indian companies, and all the opportunities were in project management that I didn't really kind of feel all too excited about. And I didn't want to turn 50 and send out resumes for programmers jobs, right? So I was like, I don't see myself in this industry or like kind of in any job like 10 years ahead. And so literally I thought, well, and I also didn't want to look back 20 years later, wondering what life in Spain would have been like. I always say, like, I fear regret way more than failure. I don't mind. I thought, well, I kind of, there's something there. And so what would happen? Like, what would I do if I didn't have to worry about anything, if I didn't have to worry about time or money or language or paperwork or anything? And there I was at my dining table cutting, and I still remember the dress. It was a flowery little summer dress, and I had some flamenco music playing in the background. I'm like, yeah, that's what I do. I'd have a little sewing studio and I'd make made to measure flamenco inspired, roughly polka dotty, cute little outfits. And I'm like, oh my God, this would be my happy place. Right. And then I was thinking, well, what could possibly go wrong? And like literally, I thought, well, is there frankly, like literally, practically, is there a showstopper? Like if I go and, oh, I'd love to be a doctor. Well, I can't just be a doctor just because I feel like it, right? But I can be a dressmaker just because I feel like it, right? So you still have to learn, but there is no exam required, So, I'm like, well, that is in theory possible, so there isn't really anything that makes it impossible right from the start, And then I thought, well, okay, let me just sew. Let me find, let me find a dressmaker to take some classes because, I knew how to sew because I've always sewn, but never professionally, and it was literally just one step at a time, and I kept taking Spanish classes and I kept taking trips. Took about 2 years until I actually resigned from my job and moved. But I thought, well, look, I don't know whether I literally had a 50-50 sense. So that I don't know, I have no idea whether this business idea could work because, well, there aren't that many German hobby sewists to move to Spain to try and make flamenco stuff. Like there wasn't really much you could research about that. So there was only one way to find out. And I just wanted to know, I said, I don't know whether I'm going to like living in Spain. I love going on trips, but the same, laid back, mañana attitude, I'm like, that could drive me nuts when I'm trying to live there. I don't know whether I'm going to like it, but just, in case of doubt, you've got to try it out because there's no other way to know. And I did want to know.
Yes. Well, I love that story because there's a couple of key questions I heard you say in there. And one was, what would happen if, right? And I think when we do often ask ourselves that, what would happen if, we go to the negative as opposed to well, what would happen if I was able to move into Spain and I was able to speak the language and find a way to be able to have a career and have those, be open to those possibilities as you're thinking about that, because that's such a powerful question when you ask yourself that. What would happen if I took this risk? What would happen if I left my job? What would happen if I left my family behind and started a new life over again? And I've done that many times myself. And it's caused me to have so many different adventures in my life and moving around the country. I've just moved within Canada, which is probably further away than what you would have moved, but with different languages. I actually moved to the French province as well. But, when you're thinking about an entrepreneur that's looking at outside of the box of what they're currently doing, I loved how you talked about, well, I like sewing and I'm already doing some sewing. What if that? Because that's such a pivot from what you were doing to what you chose to do to make it work for Spain. And most people will be so afraid of that massive leap. So tell me how you managed that massive leap within there, because that was a big change.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. And I mean, obviously, I've thought about that because, when you tell people, oh, I'm going to leave the software industry, work in the big banks in London City to go and do something totally crazy, obviously, a lot of people ask a lot of questions like, what on earth are you doing? And so I kind of gave that some thought. And there's two pieces to it. One piece is this like, well, what's the big deal? Like, because
Mm.
like I have this story that like the piece that makes the difference for me is I grew up in East Germany, like behind the wall, right? And I got out before that wall came down. I mean, that's a story for another day, but
Okay.
it really shaped how I see risk, right? Because
Yes.
trying to get out before the wall came down was literally, okay, the moment I make that attempt, it's like the doors behind me are closed and the doors in front of me aren't open yet. And if they open, I can't ever go back. So it was
Mm-hmm.
a full on one-way ticket, right?
Yeah.
So where there's literally like, okay, I mean, in the end, the wall came down and it was all not that bad, but you didn't know that at the time, right?
Yes.
So there was this sense, okay, this is a real one-way ticket. For me, moving to Australia, moving to Spain, starting a business, what's the big deal? If it doesn't work out or if I don't like the way it shows up, I can go back.
Yeah.
It's not a one-way ticket. For me, there's always like there's nothing at stake.
I love that. Not a
What to
one-way
me
ticket.
feels much more at stake is not making a move and
Mm.
staying where I'm sitting. And then you get older, you come to a point where you go, oh, I wonder what life in Spain would have been like. That to me feels
Yeah.
a lot more of a risk or of something where the risk of regret
Yes.
is so much bigger then yeah, well, if it doesn't work out, well, what's the big deal? I just go back and get myself another IT job, right?
Yeah.
So there wasn't really, I really felt there was nothing at stake,
Mm.
and the other piece to that in my mind, um like it wasn't actually as radical as it looked. Like to me, I always said it is funny, like designing it, like making a dress for somebody is actually exactly the same process as developing software. Like the
Okay.
process of creation is exactly the same. Well, yes, the technical, practical bit is a little different, but the actual process of, you have a client and you go, well, okay, tell me, what is it that you're looking for? Like, digging in, like, what is the stuff you're not telling me, and so really understanding what it is they want, and then you go away like, oh, let me come up with something. Let's get creative. Let's find a solution here. Let's design something that is really custom fit for what it is they
Mm.
need. And then you come back and then they test, or we have a fitting, right? You try it on and then you
Mm.
clear up any, well, did I understand this right? What needs to be adjusted now that we see the thing? Is it what you thought it would be, right? And so we go through this process of iteration
Mm.
until we've got the final product. So the process is exactly the same,
Wow.
and that's the piece I've seen, that actually the process of building a business goes through that same process as well, all the same stuff. So it didn't feel as radical to me as it might have felt to other people, or might have looked for other people.
Mhm. Well, I think most people are looking at the opposite side of it, whereas you're looking at, okay, once I started into it, it was the same process. People are people, and that process of working with a person is the same, regardless of what it is that you're marketing to them or what they're interested in having change in their life, right, or their business.
Yeah.
So I love that, because so many people, like even myself, I've moved and moved and moved and moved all over the country for the last 20 years. And everybody looks at us and says, why would you do that? Why would you leave that house? Why would you leave that neighborhood? Why would you leave this? Why? And it's like, well, why not? Right? I only have one life to live that I know of at this particular life anyways.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather have that adventure. And I remember one time, I have 4 sisters, but I remember my second oldest sister saying to me one day, she says, wow, I wish I was like you. You guys just have so many adventures. You've moved all around the country. You've met all these different people. You've taken different jobs. You've traveled. You've done these things. Because we choose to hold ourselves back with that fear, as opposed to opening up to the possibility. And so I love that about yourself, because it's looking at the opposite side and say, well, it's not life-threatening. It's just a change. And what about if it doesn't work? Well, then I can pivot and change to something else, because it isn't a dead end unless you
Exactly.
believe it is.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
that
And
belief.
it is really, I mean, it is heartbreaking because like there's I'm still in touch with several of my old colleagues, right? And there's one in particular who at the time when I went to resign from my job, and that was quite funny, really. You imagine like software industry, these techie guys, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna go move to Spain, make flamenco dresses. They go, well, we knew you're nuts. We didn't think it was that bad. So one of the guys, he was saying, oh, it was exactly that, right? He's like, oh, I wish I could do that, you
Mhm.
know? And I'm like, so why don't you?
Mhm.
Well, but I have responsibilities. I mean, what makes you think I don't have any, right?
Yeah.
And I said, well, look, I don't have anything that you don't have,
Yeah.
you know? And I'm thinking, if anything, you've been in the software industry longer. Like you've lived in the UK and made good money longer than I have. So you have probably more money saved up than I do. There's nothing that would stop you from doing
Mhm.
something, and it doesn't mean, because he goes, yeah, well, but I have the kids and whatever. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't mean you don't have to move to Spain, but he has a passion for music, and so you can do something with your music right there where
Mhm.
you live. You don't necessarily have to move somewhere else,
Yeah.
if the kids are small. And so he was always this like, oh, I wish I could do what you've done, right? And he still says that to this day.
Yeah.
He's still there,
Yeah.
hating his job, wishing he could do something with his music, but does not take the steps. Like, doesn't,
Mhm.
there's like
Mhm.
the fear is just so, and you think, well, if you, I was like, how do you want to live your life? Like, do you want
Mhm.
to kind of follow the pull of inspiration, or do you want to kind of run away from the push of fear? You're going
Yeah.
to be pushed by fear all your life.
Yeah.
Like, what could happen? What if this and what if that? Yeah,
Yeah. I know there's one stat out there, and I'm not quite sure exactly how it is, but I think that it's almost like 90% of the people live within 10 kilometers of where they were born and raised. And for me, that's just like, holy, how can that happen? Like, there's so much out there, but yet we get so ingrained with that routine, with that comfort, that stepping outside of that can be very scary, like leaving the family dynamic, creating your own thing, going after new jobs that aren't located. I mean, luckily people now can work from their homes, so they don't have to even leave their home to go to the workplace, right? So there's
yeah,
all of these different elements, but there's so many people that just don't step out of their own backyard to do anything different than what they've done
yeah.
for most of their
And
life.
I don't even have, like, see, my parents are like that, right? My parents have their, my mom always said I could never do what you do. I
Mhm.
would kind of I would die of a heart attack. She was like, how can you, like,
Yeah.
never know where, because even before I moved to Spain, I was in the software industry, but I was contracting. Why would you want a
Mhm.
permanent job if you can have contracts? you know?
Yep.
So it's like, even there, it was like, well, you get 3 months contract, you get a 6 months contract, but it was always short contracts. And it almost felt like, why would I want to miss out on all the opportunities, right? So I didn't, even the years before that, I wasn't craving security,
Mhm.
because I always feel it's an illusion anyway, like as we've seen in the last few
Yeah.
years, right? So it doesn't really exist anyway. And I kind of, yeah, I don't know. I never really had a problem with that. And the thing is, my mom goes, oh my God, I couldn't sleep if I didn't know where the next paycheck comes from, and if I kind of
Mhm.
go to work and then there's new stuff to do all the time, and you kind of,
Mhm.
you never know for sure you're good at something, and because it's a new job again, like you have to
Mhm.
sort of prove yourself. And she really kind of, even talking about it, she kind of got all of like, that feels stressful for me, right? And
Mhm.
I'm like, isn't that interesting? I look at your job, and just the thought of going to the same place day in, day out, year in, year out, knowing exactly if you open that door, what's going to happen that day, like that suffocates me just thinking about it,
Yeah.
And I think there's nothing wrong with either of us as long as we both get to live the way we want to live.
Mhm.
Like, you're an adventurer. If somebody
Yes.
sticks you in a place where it's like you kind of need to stay in the same job for 40 years, you go mental,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So if you take somebody like my mom and force her to be adventurous, like
Yeah.
she'll probably die of a heart attack, right? So I
Mhm.
think, and she's not complaining. She loves her life. And my parents love their life. You know, they have their little base, they've worked in their jobs, they have their retirement, now they go travel, and they love their lives. They've designed their lives the way they want it, you
Mhm.
know, and you know, you're not going to hear them complain. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I
Mhm.
think what breaks my heart is something like my colleague who kind of for 20 years wishes I want to
Yeah.
be like, or you know, what you were saying, like, oh, I wish I could be like you. You know, when you kind of your heart pulls you somewhere, but you
Mhm.
don't, you know, and I'm like, how can you give yourself little experiences in you know, how can you lean into what your inspiration or how you where you feel pulled towards.
Mhm. And
You
your
don't have to
talent.
be that radical, exactly, because you don't, it doesn't always have to be that radical that you go, oh, let me move to the other end of the
Yeah.
world and ditch everything, right? So it can, but like, what can you do? You know, what's a tiny
Mhm.
step you can take that makes
Mhm.
you lean into that a little bit? Because,
Yeah.
you know, I've never heard anybody who's followed their heart, who's followed their passion, who comes to the end and goes, oh, I really regret doing that.
Yes, I agree. I was just going to say it's the passion about following that passion. And it's also growth, right? I think a big piece of experiencing new things in life is growth. Because as we experience things, we learn, we become more resilient, we become more resourceful, and we know that it's not going to be tragic for us to make that kind of a move. So as entrepreneurs, it's a little easier for some of us because we're not needing that security like other people will, because there's nothing easy, I would say, about being an entrepreneur. There's lots of challenges that are going to come up, but there's so many great wins that happen and so much growth that happens for you in that entrepreneurial area. So now tell us a little bit about your latest one, Soul Touched by Dogs, because this, how did this even come about?
Well, it's a classic example of that whole process, like the way I've experienced it a million times in a million different forms. It started with that little spark, right? And I've had this spark for a very long time, actually. You know, I love dogs, as
Mhm.
anybody who's ever met me will no doubt know. And there has been this like, oh, I just want to do something with dogs. Like there has that thing has been there for a while. Now, my mind went into a little bit of a different direction initially because, you know, living in Spain and having, you know, three dogs, you live a lot of little situations where you think, oh boy, you know, like children really need to be educated in a different way. Children
Mhm.
need to learn something different. The only way to get a hold of this situation where animals aren't treated right and abandoned and all that stuff, and the rescue center isn't the solution, that's the
Yeah.
band-aid, right? So the only place to really address something is when the new generation just gets taught something different. And so that's where I was coming from. And then in my mind there was this big canine center, right, that would have education, and you'd get to schools, and you'd, you know, go to like hospitals, and you know, and
Mhm. Yeah.
you know, where you can basically, people can stay with their dogs, and then all in the vets and this and that. And it was huge, right? So big. And it also, like, even the thought of, okay, what would be needed to make that happen? Oh, I think I thought of like, oh boy, then there's bureaucracy and licensing and this.
Mhm.
And I was like, oh, it just drains the life out of me. So, and I've been sitting on that kind of pull and push for quite a while until I kind of all of a sudden had this idea like, wait, why don't I take a little bit of my own medicine? Like, what would I say to a client who comes with an idea like that? And I'm like,
Yes.
well, I know exactly what I'd say. I'd say, so what's the tiniest step you can take right now with what you have?
Mm.
And there was well, I could write. You know, I could start a newsletter. I love writing about dogs. It's this, oh, I happen. And then there was like the energy was there. It's like, oh my God, I'd love to be able to just write about dogs. And then, you know, I've got three, like I had, you know, with the first one who passed away, like there was four dogs I can write about, you know, and loads of 20 years of experience with dogs and all
Yeah.
kinds of story. And, you know, I could curate other people's content. And so, wait, other people. I could interview people. I interview people all the time anyway. That would be fun. And then the next piece was like, well, I could turn it into a podcast. Now I have the interviews, I can turn it into a podcast. And the next piece was like, oh, actually, yeah, there's a summit. Like, oh, I host summits anyway. Like I could do a summit, for like holistic, dog professionals. And it is literally, it's almost like that old thing, like once you're in motion, the path unfolds in front of you. In any conversation, I talk about it. I'd say something and somebody goes, oh my God, you need to speak to so-and-so, right? And then have you met so-and-so? By the way, have you seen this, right? So it's almost like the connections. And it has, the piece that has me fascinated is that it has an ease to it that I'm not really used to.
Right.
Good old German, like it's got to be hard work. All of a sudden, this is easy. I had the idea, oh, I want to host my own summit. And then I was like, oh, what the topic? Yeah, easing anxiety in rescue dog, holistic approaches right there, and then I'm like, oh, I can ask these people from that summit, the other people I met here, people I've had on my podcast, every single person I've asked has said, oh my God, I'd love to. It's just sort of easy, and I'm like, I'm just like not putting the lid down. I'll just let it bubble. And so yeah, now the next piece, there's already this, there's a community at the back of that, so, and it's just like literally, but it is about being in motion. Like it's the same old thing. It's like you cannot make this stuff up in your head. I can't sit here and thinking, I couldn't have thought all of this sitting at my desk. Then, I want to do something with dogs and I'm going to this and that. No, like you don't even have the ideas. You don't have the contacts. You don't no, you have to start moving. That old saying where they say, well, you don't need to see the whole staircase in front of you. You just need to know the next step and take that, because all the rest of it will unfold. And it's usually what shows up is, especially in this case, but I think it's quite common that what shows up and is actually much more inspiring or quite much bigger or different from what you would have imagined in the beginning. I also only thought of a newsletter. Right now I've got a whole business model that kind of just happens to fall into my lap. So, but again, like, as you were saying as well, this isn't out of context, right? All the things I've done, I can only put this together in such a short time because I knew how to write. I know how to copyright. I know how to do the tech. I know how to do a podcast. I can go from idea to, let's do this within days because of all the experience that was built up over the last, not just 20 years, but all the years before that as well. So it's not just out of context, and nobody has, I think people always underestimate how much transferable skills they actually have, even when they're still in a corporate job,
No, I love that. I loved a number of things you were talking about there, and trusting your intuition and just going with what comes to you and knowing that the other things are going to unfold to show up for you. I think that's a really key especially for entrepreneurs or anybody that has an idea, even if it's for a hobby or, a passion project that they want to do, is just trusting that you don't have to have everything put together. And I've seen so many people struggle with that as they're starting out in something new. It's like, but what if this and what if that, and how do I do this and how do I do that? And they feel like they have to have all of this knowledge and all of these tools in effect and processes and systems and everything all together first before they make that first step. And I love how you talked about how it's just evolved for you. You had an idea, it felt good, you knew there was some things that you wanted to do. Some things may have seemed like a barrier, but there was like, well, what if I just let it come to me as far as what that next step is? And the visual of just taking that first step.
I think so. That's the key piece because, I see it like so often, because people often come to me, it's like, oh, I need all the tech I need, right? They have some idea for a program.
Yes.
Now I need all the tech. And I'm like, you don't need anything yet until you know what the hell you're doing, right? So, because that's the thing. So often you end up spending so much time worrying about something that never happens,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I'm like, I remember a few years ago, I did some mentoring for like Thinkific, the online course platform. So
Mm-hmm.
they send new course creators, and it was hilarious because all the people I worked with, every single person came and they had an idea for an online course and wanted help putting it together, right? And every time my first question was, so, okay, so you have this thing, have you sold it? And every time they look at me as if I'm an alien. And every time, like, yeah, but I've not built it. Like, I have to build it first. I'm like, why do you want to build something before you know for sure that people actually want it?
Mm-hmm.
So it's that thing. Like, you can run down that wrong path
Yeah.
and create hours and hours of videos and be just a little bit off in the positioning,
Yes.
where you kind of sell this thing, but people actually want to buy that thing over here. And you have so much wasted time and there's so many assumptions. I remember when I first had the idea of moving to Spain and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start a business. So, and I go on the internet and download a template for a business plan,
Mm.
and I look at this, I'm like, what on earth is all that? My little software developer mind goes, well, that's just a whole page full of assumptions.
Mm.
Like, I've
Absolutely.
got nothing. How am I going to know? I don't even know whether anybody will ever order a dress for me. Like, I can't predict how much I'm going to sell 5 years from now. I mean, what is all that? And I think you can totally overthink these things.
Yes.
Where I think if your focus is, okay, you kind of want to think about a little bit like what kind of business, what life how you want to spend your time, but you can overthink all the predictions and all this and that. I'm like, well, none of that matters until you started selling a few dresses, right?
Mm.
Because none of that is relevant until you actually have proof that somebody even wants to buy what you want to offer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So having that sales proof. I mean, I know I went into partnership with a gal a number of years ago, and we we were connecting with a women's association that would help business owners that are starting out. And so they said, oh, well, we have one spot open for some you to come in. You need to bring your business plan and XYZ. But you can come in because otherwise we don't have any spots for another, 3 or 4 months or whatever. And so we just went to a coffee shop. We took a template from a university and we put something together, and it was all assumptions. We had nothing to validate any of it. They loved it. I guess we must have been smart enough to have put some numbers together. But is that really what's going to get me to where I need to be? Or is it, understanding, like you said, who's my market? What are they willing to pay? What is the service I'm offering? And then how am I going to bring it to fruition? Because until I know that, until you've tested those markets, you don't even know whether there's a market for it or if you're speaking to the right market. And
Exactly.
that's a big piece of what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say too. You need to be able to speak the language for that particular group of people, because it's a big difference. Although it's similar conversations, it's a big difference between selling beautiful custom made clothing like you're doing versus technology background versus working on a dog project. Right?
Yeah.
All different types of clients and different emotions attached to them.
Yeah.
Right.
And you
So
need to understand. And I think what I see people kind of don't love, like they want to be, I mean, everybody loves, oh, I want to be creative. Like, everybody loves the creative piece. Nobody loves the mess of that. And I think when you look at an artist studio, it's not tidy. And
yes.
sometimes you see on Pinterest these lovely sewing studios that are all kind of like, you've not made anything in that store.
Or that's
Because
just your
like
background
real,
for show.
like real creation is messy. And that part of where you have to find that sweet spot between what you want to bring into the world, and then, because that's the thing, that's always the difference between an artist. Like, if I'm an artist and I don't want to sell my stuff, I can just do whatever I want to do, but if you want to sell something to somebody else, then whatever you offer needs to be something somebody else wants to buy. And I think, and there is that time where you need to just experiment around with what until you find that sweet spot where the three come together, and that's you rarely hit that on the first go.
Oh, yeah.
So especially when people don't set out starting a business solving an observed problem. Like if you go and out and say, well, I've seen like everybody's asking me for this. I've spoken to people, so I have an accidental business because people kept asking me and people kept asking me, and then all of a sudden, well, I better get some business cards because I'm doing this, but most people who set out and have an idea of what they want to do, and then they go, well, okay, how am I gonna who am I going to sell this to and in what form? That I think that is a process of that usually requires a few iterations. And sometimes you get what you want, and then you realize I've had that happen with my tech monster stuff. That was like, oh my God, everybody wants help with tech. And I thought initially, oh my God, I'm sitting on a gold mine here. This is going to be awesome. I love it. I love doing it. It's easy for me. People want it. We're good. Until I started working with clients, and I'm like, it's like I'm not enjoying this as much as I thought I would. So and back to the drawing board, right? So it's like it's not usually a straightforward process, and people hate it. People think they can just fill in a little client, like ideal client avatar thingy, and fill in a workbook to develop their signature program, and off they go. And in real life, I think it's a lot more messy like that, and you have to just start moving, start helping people, and then it's a matter of a lot of it is pattern spotting. I always find like your people. I always thought like, oh yeah, I don't know, like I think of my people, they're women. Funny that. I love working with men. It turns out that my ideal clients, that's not about gender, and I always thought I'm marketed to women.
Yes.
And that's not how it works, right? So it's like I find certain qualities that they all have in common, so now I know who they are. Now I can tell one a mile away, right? But it was more like, okay, who are the people I loved working with? Who are the people where we have that perfect match where it's like, oh my God, this is so easy. This is, almost, you feel almost guilty for getting paid for it, and then you look at, okay, like it's this person, that person, that person. So what do they have in common? And that's how you start pulling out, what the pieces are. But you can't make this up. Like I think worksheet is just like your little, all these exercises, they're just the starting point. And then again, you need to sort of talk to real people and see how that actually plays out.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's because we end up coming in and we haven't actually had conversations with potential clients, right? We have this vision, we see other people out there doing it. We copy kind of what they're doing or say, oh, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. But we really don't know if they're making revenue.
And also what works for them might not work for you.
Exactly.
So and they kind of they may have something. Somebody actually said this, and it was surprisingly honest. Most of the time people not, right? She was saying like, oh, I can't remember the number, but like I just made a bunch of money off one email. I just sent one email to my list and I made all this money, right? And then she says, well, what most people won't tell you is that I've been nurturing that list for the last 10 years.
Yes.
So it's like you always see certain things and you don't know how they got there. You don't know what they have in place that you may not have in place, and and what suits them. And I think you always come from a whole different, much more grounded place if you're doing your thing your way. I always say, like, you learn from other people. Learn, like, do a Bruce Lee, like, learn it all, and then you close the books and make it your own. And that's when you step out really powerfully. As long as you're just copying somebody else's stuff, you always paint by numbers. Like, you're not really creating art here.
I love that. Paint by numbers. I loved that when I was a little girl. made life really easy, and I like to color inside the lines.
Yeah. So but like when you look at it, like Great
Yep.
artists don't work like that.
No,
You
they
know, you
don't.
kind of, you learn your
Yeah.
basics there, and then you just throw it out, and then you get, then it gets interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, my husband and I took our paint by numbers into renovating houses, so that's where I get to have my creativity come out as we're renovating our houses. So it definitely, when you're looking at any element of your life, whether it, like we've talked about, a passion project, a hobby, something that you want to do on the side, there's music, etc. That's fabulous. There's opportunities. Take advantage of that. And then the other thing that I'm really enjoying in hearing your conversation is the pivot. It's okay to pivot at any point in time throughout your journey, whether you're working on a particular project, whether another idea comes to you, be able to explore those opportunities. Because I think as an entrepreneur, just like you are for 20 years, you've made a lot of different pivots, and people would say, well, how are they even related? The business structures are related, but the ideas are what's that inspiration. And that's what brings the excitement and the passion and the success in your journey. Yeah. So it's just been an absolute pleasure to hear you speaking today. And I really, really enjoyed all of the tidbits. There's so many that you came up with today. So now how can people reach you?
I'm kind of easy to find. Like, I think the entrepreneurialexperiment.com is a good place to start if you want to try out what that feels like when you give yourself radical permission to go with the flow.
Yeah.
So that's probably a really good place. But I'm on LinkedIn as well, and ankeherrmann.com is my main website. And Soul Touched by Dogs, obviously. soultouchedbydogs.com. So if you're a dog lover, I'd love you to go there.
Perfect. Great. We'll put those up in the podcast notes so that everybody can have a look at those. But definitely reach out to Anke. She's just a gem. She's always like the smile that she has today. I've never seen her without that. So I know she's living her best life. I know she's having success. And the soul touched by dogs is the more, I think, appropriate to say the number of souls that you've been able to touch in your lifetime has been incredible. So thank you for your contributions.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. We'll have you back again, I'm sure. Thank you for tuning in to Sally Speaks Mindset podcast. We hope this episode has inspired and empowered you on your quest for success and personal growth. If you're ready to take your success journey to new heights, connect with me, Sally Arkell-Boles, your high-performance success and mindset mentor. Whether you're an executive, entrepreneur, or part of a dynamic team, I'm here to help you navigate challenges, supercharge your mindset, and drive exceptional results. Together, we'll embrace a transformative approach, breaking through limitations and opening doors to uncharted territory. No matter your industry or profession, my mission is to empower you to excel. From leadership development and sales excellence to personal empowerment, we'll tailor a journey that aligns with your unique goals. Connect with me and start your transformational journey today. Let's collaborate on unleashing your full potential and creating a future filled with success and growth. Don't forget to follow, like, comment, and share to spread empowerment. You can find more about me and connect with me through the links provided in the show notes. Thank you for being part of the Sally Speaks Mindset podcast community. Stay empowered, stay motivated, and keep working towards the success you deserve.